Hello YouTube friends, Ben Ochart here. Thank you so much for tuning in. It's very appreciated. And today I'm going to talk about my top 5 aquarium setup disasters. And hopefully these are things that you'll find useful and you can learn through my mistakes, and which is a big part of my channel, with the motto we all learn from each other, and so you don't have to make the mistakes. So if you like the content of this channel, be sure to subscribe and be sure to hit that bell so that you get notifications of new content when it posts. That's very appreciated. And so let's just get right into this, into the top 5 aquarium startup disasters. So let's start with number 1. I made a list. You know me, I love lists. And number 1 is not enough research. And I think, getting into aquariums, at least for me and maybe for you, is a bit of an impulse. I mean, you see some pretty fish, you see a nice tank, and you want to jump in. And I certainly did that. And what that ended up with is fish that were really not right for the setup that I had. I had fish that were together that shouldn't have been together, and ultimately what it did is it forced me, as I became more educated, as I did my research later, I ended up having to adjust and get rid of fish and ultimately get a bigger tank. I had to make a decision. Do I go bigger or do I switch over to smaller fish? And so what it did is it sort of forced my hand. Now, this is not an uncommon learning curve for a lot of us fish keepers, but it could have been avoided if I had done a bit more front-end research. And today, with the availability of web pages, of blogs, of YouTube videos, there's a lot of information out there that we can go to before we commit and set things up, and then realize that I had a frontosa in a tank that was much too small for it. I had fish from different lakes that really shouldn't be together. I had fish that were not necessarily compatible because of the way they handle territories and things of this nature. And I could have avoided all of that and saved the time, the money, and the aggravation by simply doing some front-end research. And so it's a bit of an after the fact, the old saying of closing the barn after the horse has gotten out, after the horse has escaped. And that's unfortunately how a lot of us learn in this hobby. I certainly was no exception. But if you can avoid that, save yourself the headache and the cost. The point number two. I was too long on what I call bucket brigade, and if I could go back to the beginning, I would have picked up immediately. I would have picked up a python or an aquarium, and with 50 feet of hose, and because that would have made life a lot easier, both for draining and for also filling the tank back up. Now, I know some of you out there have submersible pumps that you use. You just drop it in the tank, run the hose, out the window or over to the garden. And so there are a lot of ways of, that are even faster of draining the tank. I like to vacuum when I do water changes. And so for me, I was doing it with buckets. And what happened with me is I got to a point where on Mondays when I'd go to work, my lower back was extremely sore. And it got to a point where I was actually reluctant to do a water change because I knew the amount of effort and soreness that I had in store, and that of course could have led to some very bad fish keeping habits and ultimately some problems. Some fish in water that was non-optimum, and it would have resulted perhaps in fish death. So looking back on it, I would have gone right immediately into a python and again, done the research on how to do it correctly. And the way I do it now is I add water conditioner as I'm adding the water from the tap to the tank, and I've never had a problem. Never had a problem. I temperature match at the source, at the faucet, and fill up the tank, adding the water conditioner as the water's going in. Never had a problem. So I would have certainly done that from the beginning. Point number three. Point number three in aquarium disasters is patience. Patience is crucial in this hobby, and it's been moments of impatience, like wanting to throw the whole thing together right away, wanting to put fish in too fast, even after the tank was cycled, and having the fish overrun the amount of beneficial bacteria, getting an ammonia spike, putting fish under severe stress, things of this nature. So patience can pay off in a lot of ways in this hobby. One, you can cycle a tank more completely by being able to wait the 4 weeks or so that it really takes. You can grow fish out if you're patient. You can buy them very, very inexpensively when they're small, and grow them out, and that requires patience. Like a few fish in the tank behind me, that Venusis back there, that Venusis was grown out by me, and he's about 10 inches right now. I picked him up at about an inch, 3 for $10. That fish today is probably worth about $50 or more. If I tried to buy him that size, a colored up male like that. This Livingstone, also a Nimbochromis, cousin of that Venusis, was also grown out by me, and I picked him up for like $5 or something. If I tried to buy a large male Livingstone like that, I don't know, I'd pay probably $25, $30, maybe more. He's definitely a male. He colors up very nicely, but he colored down when he was put in the larger tank because, of course, he was a bit intimidated by the larger fish, and that's one of the ways that males behave when they feel like they're low in the pecking order of the tank. So, at any rate, patience pays off in this tank, and I'll talk a little bit more about patience in my final point here. Point number 4: anxiety versus simple enjoyment. And let me tell you what I mean by that. In the very beginning, I was just a bit stressed about, is my water right? Are my filters functioning correctly? What's that spot on that fish? What's the, it was too much. Now you have to be observant. You have to be diligent. You have to be on top of things when you keep fish. I mean, come on. We're keeping these living, waste-producing creatures in a contained, water environment. So you have to be on top of it. Okay, but it was too much. It was too much testing all the time, and worry about this, worry about that. Looking at someone else's tank and really feeling, wishing I could have that. Seeing someone else's fully grown, male fish and wishing I had that fish, and being a little bit jealous or upset that I don't have that fish, and wanting to, all that is just nonsense. It's looking back on it now, it's just enjoy the tank, stay on top of things in a reasonable fashion, but don't go crazy, don't drive yourself crazy. Trying to be so on top of every part per million of everything that you drive yourself insane. These fish are actually far more resilient and far. Look at that Fusco. Grew him out from a little baby like this big. He was like that big when I got him. Look at him now. Just a beast. Anyway, so so at any rate, enjoy your fish. Really enjoy your fish, and don't over sweat, don't over worry, don't have the anxiety that I had early on about every little thing. I was coming from a discus background, and discus are gorgeous. They are like the king of freshwater fish. They're just beautiful. And but boy, you've got to watch everything, because one little hiccup and they're belly up. So that was the background, and so I had to kind of dial it down a little bit when I got into these African cichlids, which are a far more robust type of fish. And so anxiety versus enjoyment. enjoy it. And don't worry about those tanks that you see out there. Don't worry about those beautiful large fish that you've never been able to get a hold of or can't get a hold of. And just enjoy what you have. Enjoy other people's fish when you watch them on YouTube, you know. And so you can enjoy them vicariously without having to pay for the care or the food. So, all right. Now this is my final, my fifth startup, aquarium startup disaster. And some of you are going to be able to guess what it is. And if you guessed it, put it in the comments below and let me know if you guessed what I would list as the fifth and most significant startup disaster. And that is not quarantine. You know, it's like, well, you know, I've always put them in the tank. Nothing bad's ever happened. Well, for me, it was, you know, this is my takeaway on it. Nothing bad has ever happened until something bad happens, and then you realize the vitalness of actually putting fish in quarantine and keeping them there for at least a month. You know, quora from quatra, it comes from 4, you know, 4 weeks minimum, and be patient and don't rush it. And really watch those fish in quarantine. If anything is a little off, they're not eating, the fins don't look right, there's a little mark on the body, the belly doesn't, it seems a little bit sunk, something, don't introduce them into the show tank. No matter how anxious you are to get them in there and show them on a video and share them with your friends and ask me how I know. It cost me half my stock. By not having, and this gets back to patience. This gets back to patience. You get a fish, you know he's going to be beautiful in the tank, you know, in your show tank. You're anxious to get him in there, but and you rush the process, or you didn't plan out the process and you ordered new fish while a fish hadn't finished his quarantine, and so you moved him out of quarantine instead of restarting the clock. When you put new fish in quarantine, you start your month over again. And I didn't do that, and I paid the price. Now, when you're first starting up a tank, and you put your first batch of fish into your show tank, that's your quarantine tank. Okay, yeah, I get it. Yeah, I'm not going to quarantine my fish. This my first wave of fish I'm putting in. They don't need to be quarantined. Just put them in. But I'll tell you something. You get a second wave of fish for your new tank, and it's just been a few weeks. You know what? Put those new fish in quarantine. I mean, wouldn't that be worth it rather than risking wiping out the whole, you know, the whole stock? I mean, you're better off doing that. So when you start up your tank, start up a quarantine tank, or have at least a little 10-gallon available that you can, you know, get up and running right away if you have to, and if you get new fish that you add to the first batch, the first wave, put them in quarantine, let them sit there for a little while. And you will avoid the kind of lessons. And like I said, it'll work. You can put them right in your tank, and it'll always work until it doesn't work. Those are my top 5 aquarium startup disasters, and I hope you found those helpful, useful, and for some of you more veteran fish keepers, I'm sure you can relate to some of them. Share your aquarium startup disasters below. I'd like to hear what you have to say in the comments. Share them with other fish keepers that read the comments, the Convo Gang. We all learn from each other, right? And hey, come by on Saturday for the live stream, the Cichlids and Coffee live stream, and we get into some great conversations. Great people show up, and they get into some great conversations in the chat, and it's a lot of fun. It runs for about an hour, 10 a.m. on Saturday, 10 a.m. Pacific. Okay, that's noon Central, or 1 o'clock Eastern time. Okay, so thank you so much for tuning in. You are appreciated. Be sure to hit that bell and subscribe if you haven't already. All right, thank you so much. Bye-bye.